I brought my easy button because I am going to show you in 3 simple steps how you can improve outcomes for children with developmental language disorder. This episode is a can't miss if you work with children, period, with developmental language disorder. Of course, my focus tends to be on preschool age, but the strategies I share with you today are effective from preschool to school age children. This episode is for you. You are not going to be disappointed. The strategies I'm going to share with you today are highly effective. They are based in the research and they're also based in my clinical experience. I'm going to tell you how it works, how the outcomes are going to come into play, and I'm going to give you a hint. Challenge creates change. So I am going to put that out there. Keep that in your mind. Challenge creates change, and not just for some children, for every child on your caseload. There will never, ever be research that finds that if all things are equal, if you give the child an easier treatment target, you're going to get better gains. If you give the child an easier treatment target, you will get less gains, period. So this isn't the case with speech sound disorders. This is also in the case with language impairment. I just want you to keep that in mind. I think a lot of experts and a lot of influencers, they like to say, well, the complexity approach works for some children, not for other children, and that it depends on the individual child. And that's a real cop-out. Because the truth is, challenge creates change on a universal level. And when people say that, that's their way of saying, I'm going to make a statement that makes everyone in the sandbox happy. But frankly, we have to stop being political when it comes to intervention. These stakes are too high. We have children when neuroplasticity is at the highest level. It's not time to make educational decisions based on politics. It's time to make educational decisions based on the research. And that's what we're going to dive into today. I'm going to tell you how the complexity approach works when it comes to language. I'm going to tell you 3 things that you're going to want to focus on. These are those 3 things that are going to move the needle. The reason this is so important, and this is something that I want you to keep in mind, is because time is your most valuable commodity. When you understand that is when you create change. When you are with those children in that limited time you have, in that caseload of 60 children on your caseload, you are going to want to make every second count. And you're going to make every second count by giving top shelf treatment targets. So this means you need to stop asking, can the child do this? Stop it with that gatekeeper mentality. Instead, you need to spend your efforts and time in asking, how can the child do this? And I'm going to give that to you today. These are 3 things to focus on if you want to create optimal change in the little time you have when neuroplasticity is at the highest level and you want to ignite the greatest change in the brain that is going to produce lifelong change for the child. So if you're an agent of change like I am, if you're with me in this, you're going to roll up your sleeves and you're going to say, how can I be doing the 5-star therapy in the minimal time I have where I'm actually creating change and changing this child's life? Sure, you can do a lot of 1-star therapy. You can go ahead and do the small stuff. You can go into teacher pay teacher and do a preposition exercise on in and on. You can go ahead and teacher pay teacher and you can go and do one on next and behind. You can go and do a grammatical morpheme activity. And I say this teacher pay teacher because the problem is people are doing these little activities that focus on one tiny little skill that have no impact functionally and pragmatically for this child's communication skills. They have no impact on this child academically. They have no impact on this child cognitively. But it's easy to do. It's easy to do the small stuff. Well, I'm saying don't waste 1 second of your time on the small stuff. The small stuff will naturally develop when you focus on the complex targets. We're going to dive in first to the research, and then after that, we're going to put it into practice because that's what I'm good at. I'm good at the research, I'm good at putting into practice, I'm good at giving you the bridge. Let's go on to the research first. Now, first of all, in our field, we have a lot of studies in the field of speech language pathology in which you have the number of kids studied that are less than the fingers on your hand. So there's less than 10 kids, maybe 4 kids in a study that they've studied. There's no alternate intervention group. There's no comparison group. There's no random assignment. Basically, you have less than 10 kids that receive positive attention. And that's really powerful stuff. So you would expect these children would make gains. I mean, if you give them a music group that you do, if you give them an aerobics group, or if you give them a yoga group that you do, so you would expect gains of positive interaction. So maybe that's all we're seeing when you're seeing these studies that many people call according to the research. And the research is just few children that received an intervention and they made gains over time. And it's probably simply because of attention effects, which is because they receive positive attention. That's not really research. I mean, that kind of is a pilot that tells us, hey, we might have something here, something that we should research, but it's definitely not research. I have an evidence-based practice brief here. The studies in this evidence-based practice brief, I'm not going to share with you because these are studies which are less than the fingers on your hand, that children participated in a group and made some gains, which we would expect because they received positive attention. What I am going to share with you is the good stuff. Let's share with you some top shelf research. So this study is a random controlled trial study. So that means this is a huge study for a field. This is 73 4-year-olds. And what they did is they wanted to look at their vocabulary gains by giving them this responsive language intervention approach. This is where I'm going to head with you today because this is where it's at. They used complex treatment targets. We're going to dive into that, but let me tell you about this study's findings. So they took 73 children and they randomly assigned them to a control group or an intervention group. So attention is still at play. We'll give them that. The children with the low vocabulary scores did make gains, just 500 minutes of interaction with an adult. So if you think about 500 minutes, you can think, okay, 500 minutes, there's 60 minutes in an hour. We have 60 minutes in an hour. 10 sessions would be 600 minutes. So this is not a long time, right? 500 minutes is not a long time at all. However, this study is what we want to pay attention to because this is 73 4-year-olds random assignment. Okay. This is when we're talking about research. We're entering into the research. The only thing that would have made this research better is if they had an alternating intervention group. So you received intervention with this target and you received intervention with this target, and we kept everything the same. It's not that clean, but it's good enough considering that it's not less children than we can count on our fingers. And they received positive attention for a few weeks and they made gains, but we're not really sure why. This is a big step up from that. Now, what this study found, and I'm going to leave it in the show notes because I think it's a good study, is it found that there's 3 techniques. And I like this study, I'm going to be honest with you, because these are 3 strategies that I use in my intervention that have been extremely powerful. So I get major gains in language, and I do that by focusing on complex treatment targets. And I'm going to share with you the 3 strategies that they use, that I use, and they really, really work. I'm going to tell you how they work because I'm there in the field doing the research, doing the testing, and I see the details of how is this going to develop when I'm working on these high-level skills. The 3 strategies that this article found, which is the effects of a conversation intervention on the expressive vocabulary development of pre-kindergarten children. What they found in this LSHSS article that you're going to see cited is that these were just responsive strategies. This is just you have a talking adult partner, and how are they going to talk to you in these 3 manners that really makes a difference? This is what they did, and it was only for 500 minutes. The first strategy they had is they used the advanced vocabulary. When you say something like a big word, like we're going to do an experiment, and that means we're going to test and find out if this ball moves faster or this ball moves faster down the chute. You're using this big word called experiment, and then you're giving this simple 2 or 3 word definition on the side, this call out. That was one of the strategies they did, is simply when the adult was talking to the child, they would use the big, long, fancy words, and then they would use the super simple call outs next to them. So that's one strategy. This is the complexity approach. This approach has been researched. It is highly effective, not only with preschoolers, not only with school age and adolescent children, but also with adults. It's a universal. Challenge creates change. There's just these universals that are true for every person you work with. And for instance, like diet. Diet is different for everyone you work with, but I can tell you as my listener, a lot of sugar, that's bad for everyone. No one benefits from a diet high in sugar. No one benefits from treatment targets that are easy. I'm going to say it's in line with that. Challenge creates change. So stop asking, can the child do this? What level of prompting could I provide? How could I go multisensory and multimodal for this child with a language delay so that they get it? How could I go multisensory and multimodal for this child who's an English language learner so that they get it? How can I go multisensory and multimodal with the child with autism spectrum that has auditory processing issues so that they get it? We're not asking, can they do it? We're asking, how can they do it? So how can they understand the word experiment? How can they understand the word, we're going to make a prediction? They're going to understand those words because we're going to use these 2-word utterances to call it out. How can they understand what is the consequence? They're going to understand it because they're going to say, how is it going to end? That's what we're talking about. We are going to use advanced vocabulary and we're going to pair it with the simple. The second strategy that this article, this is the article to pay attention to. The article that has 73 4-year-olds that are randomly assigned that used this second strategy, which is quite simply make it complex. Recasting. I think of fishing. I'm obviously not a fisherman, but you throw the hook out, then you spin it back in, and then you recast it back out at the child, right? So the child is going to say something. And what you're going to do is take that child's utterance and turn it into a complex sentence. I think a lot of programs are too simple in their recasting approach. They look at recasting like you just change it a little bit, you just add a word or two. I don't want you to think about it that way. I want you to think, add a clause. Turn it into a complex sentence. Turn it into a compound sentence. Turn it into a sentence that has a prepositional phrase attached to it. Add a clause. What I do is I go right to complex sentences. Maybe the child would say, oh, that is yucky. And I'm saying, yeah, that banana is yucky because it has bruises all over it. You go ahead and you take that subject, verb, object sentence that they're giving you, that simple sentence, and go ahead and throw another sentence onto it, make it into a complex sentence, add those clauses. Because the research indicates that complex sentences are where it's at. We're going to talk about that in a minute because you always want to have an eye on the longitudinal research and on the struggles that lie ahead for the children we work at the preschool level so that we can be proactive, so that they're able to handle those challenges ahead. There's a real big reason why the complex sentence is so important. It is not just at the preschool level. Those complex sentences are going to become even more so important as the child enters school age. So we are going to be preventative in planting the seeds where this child has had lots of exposure, meaningful exposure with complex sentences at the preschool level. So that is the second tip. Number 2, turn it into a complex sentence. So recasting, once again, I know I'm bad at fishing. I don't really fish. You pull in what the child says, you turn it into a complex sentence, then you throw it out there, you recast it out into the water. That's what you're going to do. Number 3, the third tip that they used in this article that you're going to see cited below that I've used for years, and it really, really works. Focus on the how questions. So in the article, they used how, why, and tell me about it or tell me more. Now, I tend to find with my preschoolers, tell me more and tell me about it is kind of too hard for many of them. It takes a lot of executive function skills, that ability to come up and have an idea and then to go ahead and organize that idea and to put it out. I do find that how gets the job done. So talking about how we do things. And that's why in the SIS activities, we use task-oriented movement therapy activities. There are multiple steps. And we ask the child, how do we play this game? And the child goes through the steps first, next, then, lastly, because, and it becomes automatic. And that's hugely important because the child's going to be automatically able to tell a story because they're using it in a meaningful context and then acting it out with their bodies. And the reason that's so important is that children with developmental language delays have stories to tell. These are children that experience exponentially higher levels of abuse, exponentially higher levels of academic and social challenges. They have stories to tell. These are children that being able to tell the story is the most important skill for them. If they don't have that, they are going to be locked in with a mountain of frustration and no way to express it. Those are the 3 areas. Number 3 is we want to encourage their narrative abilities by asking how. I took this article and they presented it a little bit differently, and I put my twist on it. And my twist is just pay attention to what's going to move the needle. Don't worry about the small stuff. I always think of it like 5-star. Like, okay, do you want to go to the 5-star restaurant or do you want to go to the 1-star McDonald's, right? You think, I'm going to do 5-star. This matters to me. My time is so valuable that we are just doing top shelf when you're with me. And when you do that, good things happen. So you really have to value the child's time, which is exponentially more important to your time than your time because the child's brain's at a super high neuroplasticity level, right? And you can change that child's life at this time that you're working with the child dramatically. So don't be doing that 1-star nonsense. Don't be wasting your time on that business. Go to the 5-star. And the 5-star is just what I told you. Use the advanced vocabulary. Use those tier 2 words that are going to go across subject areas such as first, next, then, lastly, because. Number 2, you're going to want to put everything into a complex sentence. And we're going to explain after we go over this why the complex sentences matter so much. What makes complex sentences so special? Why are they the primo top treatment target of them all? We'll talk about that in a minute, but put it all in a complex sentence. Don't waste your time adding an adjective, adding a word or two, and that's not +1. Think +1 is plus a clause. Put it into a complex sentence. Number 3, very important. Ask, how do we do this? Now, what I think is really neat is the research shows that asking a child how we do something, how we play a game, like a movement activity, is just as effective as if you were making up a fantastical story about ghosts and goblins that requires all this imagination. You get equal language and literacy gains. You don't have to be J.K. Rowling. That's great if you're like me and you like nonfiction, and like, oh, this works for me. We're talking about how to do a process. We'll sing a song to it too. It's just as good. You don't need to be able to create a story about wizards. Everyone's a storyteller. Those are the three strategies that are going to move the needle if you have a child with developmental language delay. This is what's going to improve language comprehension. This is what's going to improve language expression. This is what's going to improve literacy skills. This is what's going to improve socialization and executive function. These are the needle movers. Those are the three things that you want to put all of your eggs in that basket. To close this, I want to share another research article. And this research article came out in 2024. And this person I've heard a lot about. She's kind of a leader in the field of school age and a leader in adolescent literacy skills. And she does a lot of citations of Maryland. She's another leader of school age and adolescent intervention. So, what I'm telling you is, I always keep my eye when I'm working with preschool level children on what is going to be the game changer in elementary school. What is that skill that is going to be pivotal for them to have automatic? It's kind of like phonemic awareness. Like, we know children that know their letters well, that know the sounds that the letters make. They are ready to take off when they go into elementary school, because that's automatic. They're ready to blend those sounds together and create words. They're ready to go and words make sentences and read pages. They are ready to take off. The same thing with the complex sentence. The complex sentence is of so much importance. In this article, I'm also going to cite this article at the bottom of the show note. This is why this article says complex sentence is so important as a target for school age children. This is why at preschool, I'm all about the complex sentence. Let's look ahead into the future. Number one, language is a container of thought. If we want children to be able to understand how things relate and connect to one another, or if they want them to understand the complexities of things, not just being subject, verb, object, but these complexities, subject in this situation, this would happen. However, the subject in a different situation, you would have a different outcome. It's complex thinking. So, language, as William LaBeouf said, is a container of thought. Complex thoughts and complex language go hand in hand. Number two, why complex sentences are so pivotal is that we find that with age, all throughout school age, all throughout preschool, sentences become longer and more complex. Now, this is up to age 25. So from age 17 to 25, they continue to grow in length and complexity all throughout the childhood years. We want these children to be able to have a strong foundation for complex sentences. This is of pivotal importance. Number three, the longer and more complex the sentences are, the more verbal working memory that is required. Think about that. We want to improve verbal working memory, and we know that throughout childhood, that verbal working memory, the ability to hear something, hold it, do something with it, sequence it, express it, this is a hallmark difficulty for children with developmental language disorders across the ages. Now, if these children are producing and hearing senses that are longer and more complex, they are indeed building their verbal working memory, which is a pivotal foundation skill from which learning is based. Number four, comprehension and the expression of complex sentences is impaired. So this is another hallmark that you're going to find with children with developmental language disorders. They have difficulty comprehending complex sentences. They have difficulty expressing complex sentences. So if you're like me, you want to hit that at the preschool level. You know that this is an area of weakness that we can strengthen when neuroplasticity is at its highest level. Number five, we also know that there's delayed comprehension of written language that's written in complex sentence form. Once again, we want to prevent literacy delays. We want them to be able to understand that text. When we get into academic text in particular, you're going to have these sentences that have 2 or 3 clauses embedded into them. We are going to prevent that delay by strengthening the complex sentence early on. Number 6, we also know that there's a delay in expression in their ability to tell narratives and their ability to write narratives. So that's where we get to the how. That ability to take their ideas and to organize them and to produce complex sentences to connect those ideas in a cogent manner. That is delayed not only in their speech, it's also delayed when they write the story. Complex sentences don't matter a little bit, they matter a lot. And this is very important. This is the 5-star we're talking about here. This is the top shelf. So, are you going to give them the top shelf? I always think of it like you're going to give them the bone broth soup with the organic vegetables and the natural herbs and everything nice. Are you going to give them that treatment target, or are you going to give them the McDonald's hamburger? Are you going to give them the 1-star, let's work on a grammatical morpheme today? That is the question. Are you going to change this child's life, or are you going to give them a simple target that doesn't move the needle at all? The treatment target matters a lot. It's like food to health, it's the food for the brain. That is why complex sentences are so important. And what I shared with you today, this research on complex sentences, that I say this is a study you definitely want to dive into. They weren't using evocative approaches. So, in my SIS membership, I use both. I use the responsive, where you're telling the children the complex sentences, and also where the child is saying the stories with you and using the complex sentences with you in a fun, meaningful manner. They made gains just by simply hearing the complex sentences. So, what I'm saying here is that complex sentences are so powerful. It's very important that you are speaking in complex sentences. And if you can embed those complex sentences in a meaningful manner, I don't think you should be doing complex therapy sentences where it's like, okay, now I want you to say, Jack, who is wearing a blue sweater, is going to the park. Jack, who is wearing a red sweater, is going to the park. I don't think you should do that non contextual drill and kill complex sentence work. Point to that picture. Now point to this picture. I changed the clause. Ha ha ha. How exciting is that? You should work on complex sentences in contextualized areas. So I worked with him in the SIS membership within the context of telling stories, within the context of movement. That is about making it meaningful. The child is producing it, and they're producing it and acting it out. The child is producing it, and they're producing it in a story context. That's where you're going to change the needle. The further you get away from functional communication, the further you're getting away from changing that child's life. I want you to take all of this information, roll up your sleeves, you've got this, and make the world a better place, one child at a time. You are always going to be first.